yeah, like some people don't understand like what it means to actually use these licenses and what it means to make something open source. They sort of just think they're I don't know how people think about it actually. I think people just don't really know what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, I think people just see them as complicated legal documents a lot of the time
Mhm.
and may kind of gloss over those and or read summaries that I've seen in a lot of cases that kind of don't relay the full picture.
Right.
So the end user of that license doesn't understand the full text of that. And that can lead to questionable things. But then it's always a difficult case of whether it's a misunderstanding, whether someone's being potentially, specifically quite malicious with that.
Mhm.
And it was in that case that kind of really warned me to these situations, just because that person that had posted on Reddit seemed quite scared because they would be legally threatened, and the developer was saying, remove everything because they've now made that a commercial project, so they're rescinding the license.
Right.
To which I said that they can't do that, so I just created a clone, a private kind of not private, it was a public fork on GitHub, but
Mhm.
just complete detached, so then they could go in there and play with that separately without potentially being harassed by the original developer.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that was the first major case. And then probably the one that got me really into looking at the licenses was one that's in my Confusion Cases project.
Mhm.
And that's for cal.com,
Okay.
which advertises itself as an open source alternative to Calendly.
Mhm.
So this is an open source project that's under the AGPL v3.
Mhm.
And I mean, I originally came across this from another project, a very little known project, didn't have really a following. And again, posted on Reddit, and I queried one of the lines in there because they had something along the lines of, if you clone this to a private location, to abide by the AGPL3, make sure you keep it public.
Mhm.
And I kind of looked at that, and as far as I'm aware, in terms of the AGPL3, nothing like that exists. I haven't really seen that in any licenses because it's not very practical. Because what does that essentially mean? As soon as you put it down, are you now in breach of that license? If you put it into is that private online? Is that private locally on your computer? I mean, as soon as you make a change, you have to make sure it's published as soon as you possibly can. What does that mean? So I queried that, and then they said they just copied it from cow.com, and that's quite a common thing within this landscape. Is that one person will misrepresent a license or misunderstand it, and then that kind of spreads to other projects.
Mhm.
So I queried it with them. So this is the first time I'm probably having an actual direct interaction with an established project. And the full conversation is available. I've got a screenshot of it as part of that project. But yeah, I went into their Slack and just queried that line, and it was just really interesting to me throughout that conversation, and then from subsequent conversations on Hacker News, I think it was,
Mhm.
that I got the feeling they didn't really understand the full terms of their license. They were quoting me like summaries from other websites that summarize the AGPL and things like that. But I was asking, what specifically prevents me from cloning into a private location and what counts as a private location? And it was very, very mixed, and they couldn't quote a specific part of the license. And I think they just generally had a wrong idea of the license because they were saying how this license was intended to prevent big companies like Amazon stealing projects, and they pointed to
Mhm.
Elasticsearch as an example. And under the AGPL, Amazon can do exactly the same. If
Mhm.
anything, Amazon kept that project open source when the original company changed their license.
Mhm.
So they kind of had the wrong idea about what this license does for them and how it protects their their project in general. And I just
Right.
kind of found that interesting, and also their kind of, I guess, stubbornness not to take on the information.
Mhm.
Because if you look at the wording, and it's still on there actually, still on the project. Um, Let me just double check the current wording because I think it did change slightly.
Yeah, if you can show me where that is, that would be awesome.
So this is Are You My Open Source Confusion Cases project?
I no, I mean the if it is still on their actual website.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Let
If
me...
if that is still there, I would definitely like to show that. This is the joy of trying to live find material.
Yeah.
It is.
I don't really use Discord for screen sharing. Can I still
Oh,
post
if you could
stuff
just
and
send a
like?
link, that would be fine.
Yeah, but how do I actually?
Oh, don't try to screen share. You're gonna break my layout.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to get back to chat. How do you get a chat window? Oh,
I
popped
popped the
out.
window out. I'd actually know how to get back to the main window. This is incredible. Let's see how long is it gonna take him to find it.
Is there a way to get back
Yeah,
to
there
chat?
is definitely a way. Yeah.
If I go back onto your name, it just goes back onto this video.
There should be a
Ugh,
button.
I feel like such a boomer right now. There we go. There's a
Yeah.
tiny little arrow in the bottom corner.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Thank you.
Ugh.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome.
Oh wait, hold on. That's not the current. That might be outdated. Bear with me.
Okay. Yep. Oh.
You edit these videos?
No,
Or
this is
viewers going to be having this awkward long
I might include
adventure
it.
in there.
It's fun.
Okay.
Okay, where are we looking on the page? What am I searching for?
So hopefully that takes you direct to it. So it's the setup heading. So it's development setup heading.
Okay, yep.
Under there, and under step 1, you'll see clone this repo into a public GitHub repository or fork. If you plan to distribute the code, keep the source code public to comply with the AGPL v3. To clone in the private repository, acquire a commercial license.
Right.
So it's that, if it was just the first text, I'd say it's just misunderstanding. But then it's also, they back that up with a link to their commercial license conveniently, which goes to their sales page. Which, to me, that feels like they're happy to be misleading about AGPL 3 to send people off to their sales team.
Well, it'd be one thing if they were doing that beforehand, but after they'd been informed about it, continuing to do that, that's where I think it becomes
and this was
weird.
a couple of years ago now. So yeah, and that isn't representative of the AGPL 3. There are conditions with the AGPL v3, but it's a complex license, and this is a common thing that people use that license specifically to scare people into doing certain things or abiding by certain extra conditions, kind of like done here. And I can't say this is malicious. It might be perfectly fine, and they're just kind of stubborn about a randomer coming up to them and questioning this when probably no one else has done, to be fair. But with the AGPL 3, you don't have to keep the source code public. You just have to distribute to those that you're providing the application to, which does mean also just accessing that. If you're hosting it as a web app, people are accessing it. You also have to abide by those terms, provide them access to the source code. But there's loads of situations, like if you're hosting it internally with a company, you could use that without having to make it public with edits and everything like that. Or you could, host it for a particular user group, and as long as only they have access, then you'd only need to distribute to them. It's only when the service is public itself that you might need to, provide it or have a means to access the code publicly.
Yeah, that's one of the things a lot of people misunderstand about GPL style licenses. You don't have to have it publicly on some GitHub. That's not what that means. You don't just have, it's not that every single person has to be able to access the code. It is the users of the software that need to be able to access it. So if you only provide it to a certain group of people, if you have this software and the only way to access it is behind a paywall, the only people that need access to the code then are the people behind the paywall. Once people have access to the code, they're allowed to share it. But the company does not have to provide it to you if you are not one of the people actually making use of it.
Yeah, exactly. It comes down to distribution. If you're receiving the product and it's under that license, you need to have the access to the source code and be able to build it and things like that. So which is quite practical in a sense. And it allowed things like being able to charge for software and build things around that. But of course, everything can kind of be weaponized.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was
like
going to say
Red Hat is a classic example of recent times of they're not really going in the spirit of it, but they'll sure as cancel your account, or if you break the terms of their service, which is if you exercise your rights under the license effectively.
Yeah, Red Hat's a example that turned from being very open source friendly to doing this. Like, they're still technically following it, technically. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, they've. I guarantee they've spoken to their lawyers and know exactly where the line is and getting as close to it as possible. Like, they haven't done that just out of nowhere. Now, you might be able to argue in a court what they're doing is not allowed, but they definitely know that they have some ground to stand on. The companies that I find really annoying are the ones who they are willing to share the code, but they're only willing to do so in the most obtuse way possible. It's like, okay, well, we will send you the code on 12 CDs that will mail to you with the slowest shipping possible. It'll get to you in a month, and you have to pay for the shipping costs. Like, that's still within the realm of a sensible way to distribute the code, but it's clearly not in the spirit of what this system is supposed to be. Like, they know that they have to provide the code in some form, but they really don't want anyone to try to acquire it.
Yeah, and that's why you end up with super long licenses like the AGPL v3 and those class of licenses, where they try and account for a lot of these scenarios. Like, it tries to build in to, you're providing that source under reasonable terms. You're not encrypting it or doing something stupid and things like that. And you're using standard tools. But then, these licenses get so long, and then people read summarized versions, and then you get into kind of misrepresentation.
Mm-hmm. And then you have a lot of people who GitHub, I think, does a good job at making it so it's easy to provide a license, and GitLab in the same way. But the way they summarize a license is only the very, very minor points of it. A lot of people apply licenses to projects without actually understanding what license they are applying and what that license actually entails for both them and for other people interacting with the code base.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're publishing some software, it's really important that you fully understand the terms that you're providing that software under. And it's a couple of times just this year, I've notified projects that are using the AGPL, often in somewhat defensive ways, and where they might have also a SaaS offering that has more features. And I've notified them to say, hey, you need to understand with this license, you don't have the right to relicense other people's contributions. You've had past pull requests, but you're relicensing that for your commercial offerings. You need to have permission for that. And it's really important that you kind of know that from the start. And that gets onto the whole kind of area of like CLAs and how they're used.
License agreements,
these licenses, which a lot of people are against, and I don't blame anyone for being against that, because a lot of them don't make it clear that you're handing over your rights, and it might not be clear to the users exactly what that means long term, and what that means the original authors that you're contributing to can do with that. But I think they can still be, they're a common tool, but it's just a shame if they're kind of, again, misused.
Yeah, for sure.